All right, welcome everyone. Glad you could be a part of our Expana grains market expectations for the second half of year 2024. So we are a data provider and analysis and market insights provider. We provide many thousands of price series, some from third-party sources and many from our own that we curate and manage, as well as price forecasting and also fundamental analysis and forecasting as well. So today, there's three of us presenting for grains. So I'm Murphy Campbell. I'm a market reporter for grains and oilseeds. I talk to people in the marketplace, market participants every day, and get their market analysis in terms of why the market is responding the way it is currently and what the market thinks is going to happen in the future. And I synthesize that down into reports and analysis and publish that. We have Benoit, who is a senior manager for grains and crops analysis, focusing mainly on fundamentals for global grains and oil seeds. And then we have Zana, who is a grains market reporter also. She's one of the things that she focuses on and is a specialist in the European and Black Seas, Ukraine, Russia region. So that's the lineup for today. So our agenda, we're going to be kicking it off with recent price movements and where things currently stands in terms of pricing for grains, wheat and corn, and I'll be taking that. And then we'll have market fundamentals, both currently and kind of forecasts for wheat and corn that Benoit will cover. And then we'll close out with Zana, who will be discussing market price sentiment going forward, what the market anticipates moving forward for grain, for corn and wheat. So wheat and corn, recent price movements. So on the left, we have a chart here that has the CME Chicago wheat futures and the Euronext or Matif wheat milling futures Paris. And as you can see, the general decline, that's the trend. The trend is a general decline over time up to this point. The market up to this point has seen we have more than adequate wheat stocks for the most part, and either stable or stable demand for the moment. And where we currently sit in terms of the impacts on pricing is a lot of harvest pressure. So there's a right now the U.S. has wrapped up for the most part their winter wheat crop that went really well, was very fast. The wheat was very good. The yields were excellent for what market participants were expecting, particularly since there was drought last year in a lot of the wheat growing areas in the U.S. If you look back at that chart, if you see near at the end on the right-hand side of that chart, a little uptick, what we had a few months ago was a crop scare in Ukraine and Russia for a while with some dryness and some frost damage, and then it's trickled off up to this point due to the fact of that harvest pressure. We still have the impacts of dry hot weather in parts of Russia and Ukraine, and then we also have in Western Europe and France mainly they've had a lot of rain, and that's impacted the yield possibilities for their wheat, and that they've been taking a hit in terms of their yield. But overall, especially right now with the U.S. harvesting their wheat and spring wheat harvest just about kicking off and looking really good, a lot of private industry sources have been suggesting that some areas may have record wheat yields. Right now we're kind of looking at a neutral price trend for the moment. So for corn, we have again declining trend overall, and again that's due to, while initially at the beginning of the year there was drought in the U.S. in the Corn Belt, and there's some concerns in South America. Overall, we still have very good production. However, there is some production issues in the Black Sea region, especially in Ukraine, where they've had a lot of dryness. And so you can see in that chart on the left, we have Chicago or CME corn futures, and then we have the MATI for Euronext corn. And you can see, as it goes, there's kind of a divergence where the CME prices are still declining and the Euronext are going up. And what we're seeing from that is because of the Ukrainian issues with the weather, they're starting to see a little bit more tightness than the market expected. And so prices are responding currently, they're starting to trend upward. However, the opposite is occurring in the CME Chicago corn futures because we have had overall, while there have been some isolated instances of some flooding in the western Midwest, some hail, that sort of thing, overall, the uh, the uh, the market expects near record or above record yields or above trend yields for corn. And for the moment, there is no weather forecast to suggest that. We have the USDA is going to release their August WASDE, which is the World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates, next Monday. And for the first time for the August WASDE, they're going to be using the Farm Service Agency or FSA data. So have never used this data so early in the year. Usually it's in September or October when they use it. But when they release their June acreage report, when they take that report at the beginning of the month, they survey farmers. There had been a lot of flooding issues, as I mentioned, and hail in the western corn belt, which the survey had just missed. The hail and flooding events happened right after the survey, and so they're incorporating this FSA acreage data. So a lot of market players are, from what I'm hearing, are going to be looking very closely at this new acreage data because we could see, planted and harvested acreage numbers change, and if we do see production change. So that is something to keep in mind with this August WASDE. So now we're going to move on to Benoit for the wheat and corn market fundamentals.
Thank you very much, Murphy, and good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending where you are. So, as Murphy said, I'm going to talk about supply and demand for corn and wheat at the global level. So, in this first slide, you can see our production estimates and forecast for the global harvest of wheat and corn. So, for wheat, going forward into 24-25, we expect an increase of 3 million tons of the global harvest. So, it's a moderate increase without returning to the record high level of 22-23. For corn, we also expect an increase of 9 million tons in 24-25. So that's also a moderate increase, but all the same, a record high level expected. And in 23-24, it was already a record high level. And finally, you can see on the right the production total of wheat, barley plus corn. So we expect an increase of 13 million tons for the three major grains. Next slide, please. So here on this slide, you can see our production estimates and forecast for total wheat, soft plus durum, for main exporting countries. Overall, for main exporting countries, we expect a slight decrease, and these decreases in 24-25 are localized in the EU 28, meaning EU 27 plus UK. So you can see we expect only 135 million tons of production, which is a big decrease compared to 23-24. So there are big decrease expected in France, in the UK, in Germany specifically, because the growth cycle has been very wet. We also expect a decrease in Russia to 83 million tons. So as I said, Murphy's are very good winter wheat yields at the beginning of the harvest, but going forward into the harvest, yields are lower, especially in the central districts and Volga districts of Russia. But still, we expect also a good crop for spring wheat in Russia. But all the same, we expect a 10 million ton decrease year on year for Russian production. And we also expect a decrease in Ukraine because the growth cycle has been rather dry. In contrast, we expect an increase in the US. So as Murphy said, very good yields for winter wheat. and also good yields expected for spring wheat. All the same, July was a bit more dry and hot, so maybe the yield won't be as excellent as expected initially, but still, we expect an increase of the US crop to 53 million tons. That's the same for Canada, a moderate increase to 35 million tons. And it is important to note that we expect a huge crop in Kazakhstan, almost 21 million tons. That will be the second highest level in the history for Kazakhstan. Next slide, please. Here you can find our corn production estimates for main exporters. So all in all, in 24-25, the production should be more or less stable for main exporting countries. Inside this, we expect a decrease, first in the US, because of a lower area year on year, but still with very good yields expected. We forecast a decrease in Ukraine to 26 million tons because of the drought and hot weather. Some market players forecast even 22 to 23 million tons. At this stage, we think it's too pessimistic, but it remains to be seen. And we expect a decrease in the EU as well to 60 million tons, and with a decrease in Romania, Bulgaria specifically. On the other side, we expect increases in South America, but it's very far away. In Argentina, so we expect an increase, to 53 million tons, but sowings will take place only in a couple of months, from October to December mainly. And for Brazil, there will be the first corn crop, which will be sown also in October, November, and the second corn crop, which will not be sown before next March or even April. So for South America, this increase in the production is still, I would say, an uncertain assumption. Also, it's important to note that for maize, we expect an increase of the production in many importing countries, such as China. And I didn't talk about this, but that's the same for wheat. We expect a very good crop in China for wheat. Next slide, please. So now we can talk about demand, and here is our estimates and forecasts for human and industrial demand for wheat of soft plus durum wheat. So in percentage. So if we look of what happened into the past, and maybe I should begin to say that human and industrial demand include uses such as milling, starch, and biofuels. So going back to the past, so in 1819 there was a decrease of the uses for the HNI. It was because there was a very poor harvest in the EU. In 1920, also a decrease of the HNI demand at the global level because of the COVID crisis, and then a very high recovery in 2021 and also in 21-22. For 24-25, we expect an average growth of the demand for human and industrial consumption based on, I would say, a slight recovery in the economy, in the global economy after the disturbance in 22-23 and 23-24 due to the war in Ukraine with very high prices for commodities. So average growth expected in 24-25. Next slide, please. So regarding wheat, regarding corn. So now for human and industrial consumption, also for food, starch, and biofuels. So going back into the past, in 16-17, the growth was very high. That was because there were very low corn prices at that time. And in contrast, in 1920, there was a decrease of the HNI demand of corn because of the COVID crisis, with a sharp decrease of the ethanol production in the US. In 2021 and 21-22, there was a recovery after the COVID crisis, and then a decrease in 22-23. It was due to two factors: very high corn prices, of course, due to the war in Ukraine, and a poor global harvest of corn. For 24-25, we expect a very moderate growth, also taking into account a slight recovery of the global economy. It's important to note that according to IMF or OECD expectations, the economic growth could accelerate to some extent in the EU and also in some Asian and Middle East and South American countries, especially in 25. But there are still uncertainties regarding US and especially China, where the economy is slowing down. So we remain very cautious regarding our expectation of HNI demand. Next slide, please. So on this slide is our estimates and forecasts for the global feed demand with a breakdown for main raw materials, so wheat, corn, barley, soy meal, and other raw materials. You can see that in 22-23, and it's rarely the case, but the feed demand at the global level decreased because of high prices, of course, due to the war in Ukraine, and also a poor harvest of corn. And then there was a slight recovery in 23-24, so thanks to higher corn supply at the global level. In 24-25, we expect a moderate growth of the global feed demand, only plus 1.7%, which remain very cautious regarding because economic recovery at the global level is still very uncertain. Inside this, we expect a growth for corn, plus 20 million tons, because corn is, for the time being, more competitive than wheat. We also expect an increase of the consumption for soy meal, because soy meal is more attractive than wheat, but also than corn. And finally, we expect a decrease for wheat because of the lack of supply and, of course, a lower competitiveness compared to maize and soy meal. Next slide, please. So here you can see the stock-to-use ratio of main exporting countries for both wheat and maize. So what does that mean? When the stock-to-use ratio is low, it means that the supply and demand configuration is tight. And when the stock-to-use ratio is high, the configuration for supply and demand is heavy. So regarding wheat, in 24-25, we do expect an increase of this ratio from 16.7 to 17.5% in 24-25, but it remains lower than the 10-year average. And this increase hides, would say, some very subtle points, because we do expect a decrease of this ratio in Europe and in Russia, and we expect a moderate increase in North America, and especially in Kazakhstan, where we expect a very huge crop. But have in mind that in Kazakhstan, this huge crop won't be available only in 1 year for the world market, because Kazakhstan has a limitation for its capacity to export. For maize, for wheat, last word, just to summarize, but we expect a moderate tightness in the EU and Russia, a barely balanced situation in the US and Australia, and a heavy configuration in Kazakhstan and in Argentina. For maize, we do also expect an increase of the ratio in going into 24-25 in main exporting countries, so to 16%, but that's still also below the 10-year average, which is of 16.7%. I would say for exporting for maize and exporting countries, it's a bit more balanced to comfortable compared to wheat, but it also hides a lot of contrast between exporting countries, and we will see it in the following slides. Next slide, please. So here is our supply and demand estimates and forecast for wheat. So the first table is about the world market. So you can see that 24-25 starts with rather low carrying stock, 222 million tons, with a very moderate increase of the production. And as I shown earlier, there is a decrease of the feed demand and an increase of the HNI, meaning the human and industrial demand. And all in all, we expect a decrease of carry-out stock at the global level. And if the stock-to ratio increase for main exporting countries, it decreases at the global level. I would say moderately, but all the same, it decreases. And the carry-out stock could be the lowest in value in million tons since 13-14, marketing years 13-14. So that shows quite a rather tight configuration. It's not a sharp tightness, but a rather tight situation. You can see also the supply and demand figures for the US. So for the US, we start with the campaign with, would say, quite not quite low carrying stock. Even if they increase year on year, they are still a bit low compared to the long-term average. An increase of the production and an increase especially of the exports, because the US will need to replace to some extent Europe, Ukraine, and Russia for the world trade. And so, despite this, the US could finish the marketing year with higher carry-out stock year on year. It does not mean that the situation in the US will be comfortable, but it should be barely balanced. Next slide, please. So our wheat supply and demand estimates and forecast for Russia here and the EU 27. So for Russia, we start also the marketing year 24-25 with quite a high stocks, but in the same time, the production declined quite sharply by 10 million tons almost. And so Russia will have a lower export surplus. So we forecast 44 million tons of exports. We can note that in July, the Russian export pace has been quite slow, and that's especially because of the import bans in some countries such as Kazakhstan, Pakistan, and especially Turkey. Turkey has implemented an import ban until the 15th of October. And our guess is that in the marketing year, Turkey will need to import wheat. So they will need to lift this ban. And when they will lift it, so for the moment it should be the 15th of October, Russia will export, we think, quite sharply to Turkey. And that's why we think that Russia will not finish the marketing year with a high carry-out stock. Its carry-out stock should be sharply down year on year, so to roughly 10 million tons, because its wheat will be needed in the Middle East and especially Turkey. And you can have in mind that Russian wheat is very competitive. It's one of the most competitive on the market. So that's why we forecast a tight situation in Russia at the end of the marketing year. For the EU 27, it's a different story. So 24-25 starts with very high carrying stock, very high, but in the same time, the production decreased very sharply. So we forecast a very sharp decrease of EU exports to 27.4 million tons. And even if there are two reasons to this, because there are not a lot of supply in the EU, and because also Western EU wheat is not very competitive. That's the case for French wheat especially. And so the EU could finish the marketing year with a rather tight configuration. Next slide, please. So now let's talk about maize. So here we can find our world stock supply and demand forecast and estimates. So at the world level, the 24-25 marketing year start the year with quite high carrying stock. So it's in next September, because here we talk about a marketing year going from October to September. So October 24 to September 25. So higher carrying stock, higher production, but higher feed demand, because maize is quite competitive versus wheat. But all in all, carryout stock at the world level could increase a little bit. And why? It's because even if maize is competitive on the feed market, the global demand remain quite moderate and shy. So that's why we don't expect a sharp increase of the feed demand. It could be higher in the context of very dynamic economic growth, but it's not the case at the moment. So we think that at the global level, the maize supply and demand configuration should be more or less balanced, or even a bit comfortable. What about US? US is very in contrast regarding to other exporting countries. US finished 2024 with very high stocks, so it's a heavy situation. So going forward into 24-25, carrying stocks are very high, and the production should be decent. Despite low area, yields should be very good, so quite a decent production. And exports, we forecast an increase of the exports, but even if US corn is competitive, as I said, the global demand is not very high, so that's why we don't forecast higher exports. So the US in this configuration may finish 24-25 again in a heavy situation. Next slide, please. Some other exporting countries regarding maize, so Brazil and Ukraine. If we talk about Brazil first, so now we can talk about 23-24 for Brazil, because safrinha harvest, meaning the second crop, is finishing now. And it's important to note that the planting area in Brazil has been very low this year, and there was also dryness. So that's why we only estimate the Brazilian crop to be of 117 million tons in 23-24, which is quite low. So to finish 23-24 in next September, the Brazilian S&D should be tight with only 23 million tons of stocks at the end of September. Going forward in 24-25, so we expect a big surge in production, but this is with the assumption of an increase of the area and average yields. But still, even with this big crop, the domestic demand for corn in Brazil is increasing year on year a lot. So the exporting surplus of Brazil is on a decreasing trend. So we only forecast 42 million tons of exports going forward in 24-25, and the Brazilian supply and demand configuration could remain rather tight in 24-25. For Ukraine, if we look at Ukraine, it's another story. Since the beginning of the war, I would say the supply has not so much been an issue for Ukraine. It was more a matter of exporting capacity. But now we are at a turn point, meaning that for the first time since the war, Ukraine should start the campaign with a low carrying stock, so roughly 1 million ton in 24-25. And on top of that, we have a sharp decrease of the production, so 26 million tons according to us. So we expect a sharp decrease of the export of Ukraine to 21 million tons only, and despite the fact that Ukraine is competitive, so it should export all it can in 24-25. So Ukraine should finish 24-25 in a very tight configuration. So if I summarize, I would say for wheat, it's a more or less tight situation at the global level, while it's more comfortable for maize, but with a big contrast among exporting countries, heavy stocks in the US, much lower stocks in other exporting countries. That's all for me, and thank you. So I pass through Zana now.
Thank you, Benoit. Hello, everyone. So I will be sharing the market sentiment going forward based on what we're hearing from market players. And I just want to emphasize here that this is not our official forecast. It's just simply the sentiment being shared by those within the market. So let's start with the wheat market first. Next slide, please. So overall, wheat market price sentiment is looking neutral. Also, there are some market players that believe that after October, we could see some price bullishness. So currently we have, as my colleague Murphy mentioned, we have new harvest from Europe, the Black Sea region, and the US, which continue to add this selling pressure. But the only major concern looking ahead is the milling wheat quality issues in Europe. So, for example, we are hearing from several market players that there are disappointing yields in France, Germany, and Poland. And the problem is mainly lying within the quality. So many lots are falling below the 76 kilogram per hectare liter test weight, which is the minimum requirement for the Euronext milling wheat. So the protein is on the also lower side in some of the countries in the Baltic states. Elsewhere, for example, in Ukraine, we also hear that about 30% of the wheat is actually meeting the milling grade. And similarly, parts of harvested wheat in northern parts of Russia is also showing a similar case that the quality is looking on the lower side. But I must say that it's still very early to say in terms of Russian wheat because a lot of Russian crop still needs to be harvested. So it's very early to draw firm conclusions. But in case we are seeing lower production and more quality issues, we could potentially see a volatility in wheat market for the prices. So for now, in terms of the quality, like I mentioned, France, Germany, Poland, Baltic states, Ukraine, some parts of northern Russia are looking on the lower side. Only Romania and Bulgaria are having a good quality. Other thing is what we're seeing in the market right now is the lack of Chinese demand. So this kind of adds to the bearish price sentiment. China has large wheat supply domestically, like Benoit mentioned before, and a very thin demand. So industry players believe that there won't be much wheat demand from China this season. So this could potentially pressure the prices as well. Another factor is Turkish wheat import ban. And again, my colleague Benoit mentioned about this. Turkey import ban, it is designed to protect domestic farmers, but market players that we speak to actually say that it might disrupt global wheat flows and slow down Russian wheat exports from August-September time and shift the competition dynamics in the EU and other markets. And actually the loss of Turkish demand is quite difficult to replace quickly in the market as well. And we also hear that actually that the ban could be extended a bit much longer than until October. It could actually be extended until end of the year. So it could again add price pressure here. Another factor that could push prices up is rather tight global wheat stocks. So industry players that we are speaking to, they say that the tightening supplies amongst major exporters could actually put wheat prices into a more bullish sentiment towards the end of this year or in early 2025. So that would be it on the wheat side. Let's move into corn. So for the corn market, and I think Benoit also mentioned that overall, also from the market player side, they see that in comparison to wheat market, corn market is looking more bearish. It has a very comfortable supply levels, or let's say more comfortable balance than in comparison to wheat market. And US is currently has high corn stocks, the highest since 2018. And generally, when one of the biggest producer like US corn stocks are this high, it tends to put downward pressure on prices. However, the bullish factor could be potentially the production declines in Eastern Europe. So as my colleague Benoit again mentioned that recent hot weather has led to yield losses. We have heard from market players that only Ukraine could lose around 4 to 5 million metric tons of corn because of dryness. So the production figure, although Benoit mentioned that it's around 26 million metric tons, we have heard ranges between 23 to 26 million metric tons, and 26 to start with is already kind of a low figure. So this could again add bullish angle for the prices. But on the other hand, again, US crop is expected to be huge, and now we currently have a very good weather conditions. So also the crop conditions are remaining quite favorable and looking quite strong. So market players believe that this could be the main factor keeping corn prices under pressure in the short to long term. Similarly to wheat market, there isn't much demand from China right now, and many believe that the amount of corn China will import this season will be relatively small. So the lack of demand is likely to add downward pressure on corn prices. But on the other hand, the corn market could find some support from the wheat market, as decreasing stocks of wheat could add demand to corn market, and this could push prices up. So again, the market sentiment is closely related to all the fundamentals that Benoit has mentioned before, and it's very closely coincides with what we're hearing from our market players. I would say that's it from my side, but before we wrap up, and if there is any questions, I want to mention that if you're interested to receive our sample report, please feel free to email us at grains@expanamarkets.com. And next slide, please. Additionally, we have one upcoming event, the AgriFood Americas Conference in October that will be held in Chicago. This conference is previously known as Erner Berry Global Protein Summit. So it's a great opportunity to attend. If you're interested, please register using the link provided below. So let's just see if we have any questions coming in. For now, seems no questions that I can see. But anyways, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out at grains@expanamarkets.com. I hope you found this webinar informative, and yep, I wish you a great day. Thank you very much for joining. Goodbye.